Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Wise Practice Podcast. My name is Amy Dover. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, owner of Dover Counseling Services in Enterprise, Alabama, and a Wise Practice consultant. This is the last episode of this four-part podcast takeover I've been able to do for the month of June, and I'm so glad that you're hanging with me for this last one. I hope that they have all given you just some things to think about, to chew on, some to pray over, and again, just really glad that you've been able to spend this time with me. It is my honor. So I want to start today with a question, and I want you to actually sit with it for a second before you answer it, because you've probably gotten this question before. What would you say to a potential client who told you that they didn't need therapy, that they were fine on their own, that they could figure things out by themselves, that asking for help was a sign of weakness, or that paying someone to sit with them and their struggles felt unnecessary, maybe even a little indulgent? What would you say to that person? You've probably had this happen before, like I said, and I certainly have. I'm going to guess that you would say something about the value of perspective, about how we all have blind spots that we can't see from the inside, about how God designed us to be in relationship, not in isolation, about how the bravest thing a person can sometimes do is ask for help when they need it. And good, those are all good answers. And I want you to hold on to your answer, because everything you would say to a client is exactly what I would say to you today about community as a practice owner. Let me start by naming something that I think every Christian practice owner in this audience already feels, even if they haven't found the words for it yet. We hold a unique tension, not just the tension of running a business, because every entrepreneur has that, not just the tension of clinical work, every therapist has that, but a specific, layered, sometimes exhausting tension that is ours in a way that very few people in the world fully understand. We are trying to do business ethically and with integrity. We are trying to honor our calling and our values in every decision we make. We are trying to be financially sustainable, because we have to be, in order to keep serving our communities. And at the same time, we are holding a faith that sometimes puts us in direct collision with what the business world would call the obvious or optimal choice. And I actually come into that, at least a weekly, sometimes multiple times a week, where I'm holding this tension of, I really need to make this decision. And it would be easy to make it looking at the business side of things, but when I throw in my faith and my values and how they align with it, it's not such an easy decision. We make decisions like that and hold that tension all the time. What do you do when the most financially sound decision doesn't feel like the most faithful one? What do you do when a business strategy that works beautifully in a secular context feels like it compromises something you believe about how God calls you to treat people? What do you do when you're sitting with a hard call and the answer requires you to hold your clinical knowledge, your business acumen, your legal awareness, and your faith all at the same time, and none of those things are pointing in exactly the right direction, or excuse me, the same direction? That is the tension. And here's the thing about that tension. You cannot process it in a room that doesn't understand all the pieces. You need a room where it is all understood, where you can name the faith piece and the business piece and the clinical piece in the same breath and have people around you who nod because they're living it too. That room is not easy to find, but it does exist, and it changes everything when you find it. I want to talk for a minute about what it actually costs you to build alone, because I think a lot of practice owners have normalized the isolation to the point where they don't even recognize it as a problem anymore. It just feels like the price of ownership, the way things are supposed to be. But isolation actually has a cost, and I want to name it as specifically as I can. When you are making decisions about growing from solo to group, when to hire, who to hire, how to structure compensation, how to build your systems, without outside perspective, you are making those decisions with incomplete information and no accountability. You're working from your gut, from assumptions, and whatever you can piece together from other practice owners who may or may not know what they're doing. And you guys know how I feel about that. And you won't always know the difference until the consequences show up. So I spent years making decisions from what felt right. It just felt right. And sometimes what felt right was actually right, but sometimes it was just familiar. Sometimes it was just what I'd always done or what I'd seen someone else do with no real understanding of whether it was working or why. It wasn't until I got into community and started learning to lead from data, to read the data and then to lead from the data, from actual numbers and metrics and informed strategy, that I realized how many of my decisions have been driven by feeling rather than clarity. Isolation also has a spiritual cost that I think we underestimate. When you are carrying everything alone, the admin, the clinical work, the marketing, the finances, the hiring, the culture, the vision, we become so consumed with what we're doing that we stop being. We stop having the margin to pray, to listen, to be still and hear what God is actually saying about the direction of our practices. We don't start operating in our own strength, or we start operating, in our own strength because there's no one around to remind us that we don't have to. And I've mentioned in these episodes for this month that, oh, that is my tendency. I default to that if I'm not careful with my time and making sure that I have margin built into my schedule. And I can tell when I don't have that margin and that ability to set time aside, for talking to God and being with Him and being in His presence and really hearing what He's trying to say to me. What we know to be true from Scripture and from experience is that iron sharpens iron. God designed His children to be in connection, not just for efficiency or strategy, but for sharpening, for growth, for the kind of accountability that makes us more of who He created us to be. The solo practice owner who is carrying everything alone is not just tired, they are operating outside of the design, and that has consequences that go far beyond the business. If you are exhausted, if you are making decisions in the dark, if you are lying awake at night trying to figure out the problems that someone else has already solved and would gladly help you with, that is not faithfulness. That is isolation, and you were never meant to live there. I don't want to make the philosophical case for community. I want to tell you what it actually produced in my practice, in my leadership, in my life, because I think sometimes we need to see the fruit before we believe the seed is worth planting. So I found the Wise Practice community in 2023, and I've been very open about all of that, just kind of where I was in my practice growth in my life at that point. So 8 years into building Dover Counseling, and I want to be honest about this. Part of me grieves that I waited so long, but the other part of me is deeply grateful because I can see with absolute clarity the difference between before and after. Before getting consulting, I was making decisions largely from gut feeling. I know you guys know what I'm talking about. From what seemed right, what felt manageable, what I'd seen other owners do. I had supportive people around me, but I didn't have peers who were in it with me. People who were in the same season, wrestling with the same questions, building the same kind of practice. After getting consulting and being in community with other practice owners, and I want to be very specific here because I think the specifics matter, I have so much more clarity on how to move, how to steward well. I understand the importance of data in a way I never did before. I understand that good decisions are not just made from what feels right, they're made from what the numbers are telling me, what my systems are revealing, what people who have been down the road before me are saying. I have access to peers who love Jesus and who I can seek support and guidance from, and that changes the quality of every decision that I make. And here's the fruit. Since getting my own consulting and starting the Wise Practice community in 2023, again, 8 years into my practice, I transitioned over counseling from a 1099 to a W-2 practice. I pivoted to a clearly identified Christian private practice and implemented a brand new marketing strategy. I completely revamped my systems. I rebuilt my clinical team. I identified and built a solid leadership team. And I developed a mission statement, a vision statement, and core values that now govern how we operate and how we hire and how we serve our clients. All of that in 2 years. And just saying it out loud, makes me tired. That is a lot of things to accomplish in 2 years. But I didn't have to do it alone. I'm no longer on my own. And sometimes I reflect, Gosh, Amy, imagine what could have happened if you had not been alone the first 8 years. So this is that what I just said to you about the changes that I experienced in my own practice, that good fruit. Those are not a list of feelings. Those are transformations, concrete, measurable, visible transformations in the practice because I had finally found the right people around me. I also want to say something about the relational piece of community that goes beyond strategy and decisions. There's something deeply life giving about being in a room with other believers who are doing what you're doing, who understand the weight of it, who can pray with you over a hard decision, celebrate with you when something works, and speak truth to you when you need to hear it. That kind of connection doesn't just make your business better, it makes you better as a leader, a person, and as a follower of Jesus. I want to come back to where we started because I know there are practice owners listening to this episode who are nodding along but still have a quiet voice in the back of their head saying, "But I'm doing okay. I've made it this far. I don't really need a group or a mastermind or a community. I mean, I can keep figuring this out on my own." And to that person, I want to say gently and directly, what would you say to a client who came to you and said exactly that? What would you say to the person who had been white knuckling their way through something hard, carrying it alone, functioning but not thriving, and who sat across from you and said, "I don't really need this. I've been managing fine on my own"? You would not say, "You're right. You seem fine. Go on home. Go about your business." You probably would say, "Managing is not the same as thriving. Surviving is not the same as growing. And the fact that you've made it this far on your own doesn't mean that it's the best way forward. It just means that you're probably good at carrying weight that was never meant to be yours alone." That's my answer to you. Needing guidance and community is not a sign of weakness. It's not an admission that you don't know what you're doing. It is wisdom. It is alignment with the way God designed human beings to operate in relationship, in connection, sharpening, and being sharpened. You would never look a struggling client in the eye and tell them to just figure it out alone. So stop telling yourself that. The practice owner who grows the fastest, make the best decisions, build the healthiest cultures, and sustain their growth over time, they are almost never the ones who did it alone. They are the ones who found their people and did it together. I want to tell you about the person I have been building toward, that I've been building toward, and everything I've shared in this episode. And all the episodes I hope that have been very helpful for you, whether you're solo or group. But there's a particular person that I have in mind when I, when I was writing this episode. So this person is a solo practice owner, or maybe you're a practice owner who's hired your first therapist and you have just this small team, you and one other person. And this practice owner knows deep in their spirit, the way you know things that God has planted in you, that they are called to something bigger. Group practice, a team, a broader reach, a practice that serves more people and outlasts them. Legacy. And they're somewhere on the spectrum between terrified and excited, maybe mostly terrified, maybe equal parts both. Maybe they've been sitting on this call for months or years, waiting until they feel ready, waiting until the fear goes away, waiting for some sign that it's the right time. And the waiting has started to feel less like wisdom and more like disobedience. Anybody hear me on that one? This person wants to honor God in this. They want to step out in obedience. They feel the pull towards something bigger, and they are not sure if they have the resources or the knowledge or the courage to get there. And they are carrying all of it right now: the admin, the clinical work, the marketing, the billing, the hiring questions, the culture questions, the money questions, all of it on their own shoulders. And they are so tired and they are ready for something different. That's the person that Built to Last is for. That is the person that I'm building a room for. This amazing mastermind that I want you to consider joining if you are that person that I just described. I want you to know that when you go into that first session on July 9th and feel, maybe for the first time in a long time, I want you to know that you're not alone, that there are other people in the room who get it, who share your faith and your calling and your questions and your fears. I want this person to feel energized, excited, relieved, like they have finally found their people, like I did 2 years ago. And 6 months later, when we close out our time together, when the mastermind draws to the close right before Christmas, I want this person to walk away empowered, knowledgeable, clear on their numbers, their systems, their compensation structure, their hiring processes, their vision, ready to make big decisions, not from a place of fear or guesswork or isolation, but from a place of clarity, community, and deep obedience to what God is calling them to build. So let me tell you about this specific room. Built to Last, growing from a solo practice to a group, launches on July 9th. It will run for 6 months. We meet live every other week through Zoom, and we go deep on everything that matters: systems, financials, marketing, compensation strategies for administrative staff and clinical staff, money mindset, interviewing, hiring, onboarding, the shift that changes everything, the one from clinician to CEO. And it's that identity shift, actually, that's the foundation that everything else is built on. It's so much more possible when you're walking through all of this with people who are doing the same thing. But more than just the curriculum and the topics that I just shared with you, Built to Last is a room. It's a room full of Christian practice owners who share your faith, understand your world, and are committed to building something that lasts. People who will pray with you and challenge you and celebrate with you. People who don't have to explain, you don't have to explain yourself to. People who will sharpen you the way iron sharpens iron. It's a room that begins each meeting in prayer. I love to invite Holy Spirit to come into this virtual room with us and be with us during that hour. I'm always respectfully request his guidance and his wisdom during that hour, and that we will be able to understand what he is, the path that he is showing us to do, that we will show up as his vessels. This is the room that I needed 8 years ago and didn't have. This is the room I want to give you now. So if you're the person I just described, if you feel that call in your bones and your spirit and you are ready to stop carrying it alone, I want to invite you in. All the details and registration are at wisepracticeconsulting.com/masterminds. That link is in the show notes. Spots are limited because I want this to be an intimate, high quality experience. And so if this is resonating with you, don't wait on it. And if you're not quite sure yet, if you're still on the fence, still asking God whether this is the right time, I just want to offer you this. The fact that you've listened to this entire episode probably means something. Pay attention to that. And if you still need a little bit more clarity on it, really need to know a little bit more about if I'm the right person in the room with you, let me know. Send me an email at amy@wisepracticeconsulting.com. I'm happy to jump on a call with you and explain more details about Built to Last. There's also great discounts for early bird. That's in the show notes as well. If you are this person I've described in the last few minutes, I definitely want you to prayerfully consider joining the mastermind. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being with me in these last 4 episodes. And I have to say, June is probably one of my favorite months of the year. So I'm so honored that Whitney graciously allowed me to take over the podcast for these last 4 weeks. I want to thank you for the work that you do and the calling that you carry and the courage it takes to keep showing up. Thank you. The community you were looking for does exist. The people who get it are out there. And the practice God is calling you to build, the one that's a little bigger, a little braver, a little more than what you have now, it is possible. And you don't have to build it alone. I hope that I'll get to see you in the room in July. Take care, guys.